early, so I was gonna maybe start with Micah. Bubbleman, you got something you want to say?
Oh, I was just going to say there's Skunkman's here as well if you guys want to hear a quick intro from him. I know a lot of people know a lot about him, but it might be a neat thing to hear a couple of words from the man himself.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry about that. I forgot.
No problem whatsoever. Here he is now.
Howdy, 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 everybody in Hash Church. My experience with greenhouses was I built my own greenhouse about 40 years ago. And then I moved to the Netherlands, where I ran many professional greenhouses with computerized darkening, computerized watering, and my favorite way to grow is greenhouses. Although I've been there. I've seen most of the changes. We were one of the very first in the world to use darkening for to mature cannabis flowers when we were in a northern environment in the greenhouse. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to step up to the box. But except for that, I am what I am, and I think pretty much everybody knows me.
True story right there. Awesome, Sam. Thanks for sharing.
We bring out.
And maybe Skunkman Sam, I don't know, I would be interested to hear about your progression of, greenhouse growing and some of your light deprivation experiences.
Yeah, where are you?
Is it on?
It's on. Go ahead. Yep.
Howdy. I've been growing in greenhouses ever since the first year I grew cannabis in Santa Cruz. That was in maybe 72 or something around like that. And that was just a homemade primitive greenhouse. And friends of mine were doing darkening for sexing, not for flowering, but for sexing. And that was in Northern California. But
tell them what we just talked about the sexing.
Yeah, one of the problems with the sexing was at that time they didn't really understand what they were doing. So they would darken it for 2 weeks until the plant showed sex. Whereas what the research that I found when we were doing the research in Holland was that most indica varieties you can darken for 1 day, and then 2 weeks later they will show sex. They will not stay flowering. And with sativa varieties, sometimes they need to be darkened 2 or 3 days at the very most. But then 2 weeks later they show the sex. And so I had a friend who produced thousands and thousands of seedlings and then darkened them off just for sexing to sell early known female plants to people. And a few times because he darkened them for 2 weeks, they would not come back. So the customers were rather irate that they had these little plants that were, 2 feet tall and flowered off, and they would not return veg.
Can you also tell the story of how you discovered greenhouse light depth in Holland?
Well, greenhouse light depth, what happened was I went into a chrysanthemum greenhouse because I was interested in building my own greenhouse or buying one or renting one or whatever. And so I saw the chrysanthemums were being darkened to induce flowering, and a light went on in my head, and I went, Jesus Christ. I had seen people darken plants with a tarp in the late 70s and early 80s, but I wasn't interested because I wanted a greenhouse that was multiple acres. And you can't hand darken multiple acres. Well, actually, you can if you have enough labor, but it's so. Once I saw what darkening could do, I instantly understood what this was for cannabis, and so that was I don't know, maybe 86 or something like that. And but once I saw that, I never stepped back. For the Netherlands, you need darkening because you can grow multiple crops a year, or you can grow one big, good, heavy crop and darken it and get it out before the cold it comes, and your heating bills are $10,000 a week.
And can you also comment, Sam, on earlier Micah was talking, and he mentioned how he kind of likes to keep them a little bit smaller, which might be perfect for what he's doing and producing super high quality flowers. But you came in as a sort of like, oh, I'd like to have really big greenhouses, and maybe just talk to why that is.
Well, the main reason is I like big plants. A lot of the work I'm doing is not commercial production. It's breeding work. And for breeding work, I start seeds, thousands and thousands of seeds. And then what I do is I want to pick the best plants. And to pick the best plant from seed, it's very difficult to do with a little 1 or 2 foot plant. You grow it 12 feet tall, and you get a really good idea of its positive and negative qualities.
Right.
And for a breeder, it's really required. So that's why I had a very high ceiling. My ceiling was maybe 20 feet or so, and I could grow 15-foot tall plants if I want, get 3, 4, 5 kilos of dried material.
Boom. Thanks, Sam.
Let me ask you, Sam, about the sexing one more time. You know, for people that are, you know, maybe don't have a lot of power still in Humboldt, or, you know, these craft farmers, if they were to sex their plants, like you were saying, how long, it's depending on strain, you would say, but if somebody was to do it, would you say to darken it for a day or two instead of the 2 weeks like your friend had done? Because I experienced the same thing. I've seen plants that didn't come back out of the veg, and it was a huge pain in the ass. So could you talk a little bit more about that, like your recommendation?
Is my mic on?
You're on.
Okay.
Yeah.
The main thing is that cannabis will take 2 weeks to express its sex, but 1 or 2 days of darkening is enough to trip the expression 2 weeks later. That's the main thing you have to understand. With earlier varieties, only 1 day. If it's a very late equatorial variety, maybe it takes 2 or 3 days at the very most. And then when you put them back on a long cycle, 2 weeks later they sex, but they don't stay flowering. They are totally veg, and you grow them really, really big and then flower them off, and you know what sex they are.
That's almost like at the end of that, you should also say, "You're welcome," because that was a gem right there for those who watch.
Dude.
Absolute game changer. Thank you for dropping that knowledge.
Yes, I think would help that. You know what I mean? Like, can't we quantify things with lab tests sometimes? Because I know that I've talked to a few lab companies that have said over the course of time, some of the greenhouse material they've been testing has tested higher in the THC, CBD, and even the terpene percentages. And I know that the terpene companies, Bubble Man, maybe you might know something about that, with greenhouse material and the terpene production that you might have heard about or known.
Let me see. Am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. From, you know, right from Tony's mouth, almost always the light depth, the greenhouse is going to produce like a way higher level of terpene production. You know, not just a smaller amount, but like a substantially larger amount. And not to change the subject completely, but while I have the mic, one of the things Sam was mentioning about greenhouse triggering flowering as well, particularly in, I guess it was in like close to the equator countries where they have 12 hours and 12 hours of light and darkness. And often people are trying to grow with added light, additional light. They'll maybe put it on for another 5 or 6 hours. Sam had an interesting bit of information to share on tropical cannabis growing.
Basically, what we found is that in the Netherlands, when I would grow big, giant plants at 10, 12 feet tall over the winter, I could give as little as I was using these little 60-watt blue incandescent agricultural balls from Philips. And so they were geared towards, but they were only 60 watts. And I would use one of those for every 10 square meters. So that's 100 square feet. And it absolutely prevented flowering. Not only that, but you could use as little as just instead of giving them 6 or 8 hours of light to keep them veg, what you could do is just in the middle of the night, give them 2 hours of light. That's all they needed. All
I
you
just
do
heard
is-
that.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 30 years.
That's a big one for people that have been, especially in countries where, you know, he was mentioning like only having one generator, only being able to turn on enough light in one section of the greenhouse. You could do a quarter here, a quarter there, a quarter there. And instead of leaving it on for that 8 additional hours.
I'll tell you how severe I've done it. I actually was storing plants under refrigeration at about plus 3-4 degrees. So they're in a refrigerator with lights, and all I gave them was 15 minutes of light 4 times a day. So every 5 hours, I'd give them, or 5 or 6 hours, I'd give them 15 minutes of light. Totally prevented flowering. They stayed veg. They also weren't growing because it was so cold. All I was trying to do was keep the plants alive as a library.
Did you see that there was any reduction in actual growth?
No growth, practically. I mean, under 3 degrees, there's practically zero growth. I wasn't trying to grow them. I was trying to maintain them.
Yeah. But I guess my question is, you know, I think some people would argue, well, they keep all these lights on because not only do they want to keep the photo period going, but they're also trying to have the plant grow at the same time. So I'm just curious if you saw any difference at any point in your experiences where you could see like a difference in growth rates.
The more lumens and the more hours, of course, you're going to get more growth, of course. But that wasn't my goal. My goal was to, I had big plants in the ground, which I conserved in my greenhouse. I had a small collection on ebb and flow tables under halides, and just as a library. And I had a third collection in, I had specially made like a refrigerator with lights built into it, which, and those, I gave them as little as an hour a day, broken up in 15 minutes, so that they never received really long periods of dark at any one time.
It's awesome information. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I just met a guy in Humboldt. A lot of my research comes from old school growers in Humboldt County, and they said the same thing Sam was saying as far as keeping the plants in veg. The guy came here recently and did a greenhouse tour, and he goes, no, I only have my light on in the middle of the night for 1 hour in the wintertime to keep them in veg. And I thought 1 hour. And so, yeah, to save on generator and power and all these things that people deal with, they can't use all this electricity or access to it maybe in the middle of the night, you know. So when he told me that in the veg period that he only uses the light for 1 hour in the middle of the night, I was just like, holy crap. And now I'm starting to hear little bits and pieces of it. And then of course now Sam is kind of confirming that whole thing too. So I mean, I'm gonna try it, you know, like I think it's pretty cool. I want to try the sexing stuff and play around with all those things. I like doing experiments and
Sam,
so
another good thing to remind yourself is lots of lumens, less time, like an hour, but less lumens, maybe 2 hours.
To prevent flowering.
To prevent flowering. You know,
right.
So keep that in mind as your sort of recipe as you get into it.
Well, yeah, because
oh, sorry. So I just want to make sure I'm hearing you right. So the thought process is don't give them a long period of no light. You're saying just break it up and you're turning the light on for 15 minutes every hour.
Well, I've heard that, and I know Sam was saying that for his library, and part of his experimentation was to keep these plants from growing, but to keep the library. And so he said he dosed them in a couple times, 15 minutes at a time, if I heard you right, Sam, and then 2 hours. And what he were just confirming was the 2 hours for a low lumen light.
Right, exactly. If you had higher lumens, you could use maybe less time. Thing you wanted to share about talking about lumens?
Basically, what we found is that absolutely you need lots of lumens to produce biomass in vegetation. Is flowered halfway or more, and pretty much all it's going to do then is fill out the flowers and maybe add a lot of weight from resin and stuff. I found lower light levels, I'm talking about from the sun or from artificial lights, actually produce superior product. Also, what I found is that the high temperatures associated with flowering, really high temperatures, it's not really positive because it has a tendency to vaporize terpenes right on the plant. So lower temperatures, a little bit lower lumens, I found produce superior product.
Here when we were on mute that, well, do you want to mention it, Sam?
What was it? I forget.
It was about the size of the resin glands versus the size of the plants.
I just wanted to mention that when I grew the identical clone, big, small, even in vitro, so that the flowered off plant was only maybe an inch or two tall when it was completely flowered in agar in vitro in a test tube. The resin is much smaller. The individual resin heads on that plant. When you grow it 2-3 feet tall, like you're talking about for sea green or something, the resin is quite a bit bigger. But when I grew my same clone and it was 12 feet tall, the resin was again a little bit. That's important.
It's important to me.
We missed that last little part, but
well, the last little part was that if your plant is 12 feet tall and you flower it off and then you collect the resin from that, it's again a little bit bigger than the 3-foot plant. Each individual resin head is a little bit bigger. And for hash makers, that's important.